We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Beis Amid Beis Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 72b. On the previous summit, the Gemara brought a machlukas tanoim between Rebbe and Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon, whether the Ketzira Sa'omer, the harvesting of the Omer, can it be done not at the proper time and still be kosher. The proper time is at night. That's the night of the 16th of Nisan. But let's say it's done during the day or some other time. Is it going to be kosher? Rebbe says yes, it will be kosher even at another time, even though that's not preferred. Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon says it is not kosher if it is not done at the proper time. And the Gemara explained Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon, because Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon says that it is a mitzvah to harvest the Omer, and that is docha Shabbos. It can even be done on Shabbos. And as we will see again, the Gemara assumed on the previous summit that Rebbe also agrees with that the Ketziras Omer is docha Shabbos. But the Gemara said that Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon's logic is following Rebbe Akiva, because Rebbe Shimon, who's the father of Rebbe Elazar, he was a student of Rebbe Akiva, and Rebbe Akiva says something cannot be docha Shabbos if it could have been done before Shabbos. And therefore Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon says simply it must be the Ketziras Omer cannot be done before Shabbos. It must be done at the proper time, not at the improper time. And that's why Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon says, again, the Ketziras Omer must be at night. But the Gemara asked if that's true, Rebbe should say the exact same thing. Doesn't Rebbe also agree with Rebbe Akiva? Isn't Rebbe also a Talmud of Rebbe Shimon? He should agree with Rebbe Akiva that it's not Docha Shabbos if it can be done at a different time. So why would Rebbe say that it's able to be done at a different time? And the Gemara answered for that Rebbe holds like a different teaching of Rebbe Shimon, because Rebbe Shimon also says that something should be done if it could be done at the proper time. If there is a proper time, chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, it's best that it be done at that time. And so therefore in this case as well, the Ketziras Omer, it is still preferred that it be done the night of the 16th, and that's why it's docha Shabbos, because chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. And the Gemara now continues, if that's the case, if Rebbe essentially is also following Rebbe Shimon, just a different statement of Rebbe Shimon of chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, and that's why Rebbe is able to say that Ketziras Omer is kosher even if it's not done at night, but still it is docha Shabbos because chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. So then we're back to the question on Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon. If Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon lo shmi'alei, did Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon not hear of this idea of chaviva mitzvah b'shaita? This essentially undoes the entire logic we gave on the previous summit for Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon. Rashi explains, Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon lo shmi'alei, ha de chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. He didn't hear the statement of his father that chaviva mitzvah b'shaita bitmia. This is a question. Elabal karchach shmiya must be really that he did hear it. Velo gomar mina, but he still doesn't learn anything out from there. To hasam gabe ivarim, because where was that statement made? It was made over there by the limbs of the mizbeach. We say chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. You don't wait till after Shabbos. You burn it on Shabbos. Chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. But that is shani. That's different. The dachu Shabbos mishum chavivos mitzvah. There's a pushing off of Shabbos because of how beloved the mitzvah is. Shaharei dachas ashchita, as the Gemara is about to say, because we've already pushed off Shabbos for these karbanos. We've already slaughtered the animals on Shabbos. Dachsa shchita as Shabbos kodem laktar. We already pushed off Shabbos by slaughtering before the burning. Di'efshel lasos erev Shabbos. Now that of course cannot be done before Shabbos. These are karbanos that are supposed to be brought on Shabbos. V'kevan denit Shabbos lidchos eitzel shchita. Once we're already pushing off Shabbos for the slaughtering, so then nidchenami eitzel laktar. So we'll also push it off in terms of the burning. Avol be omer, but when it comes to the omer, lekalamemer hachi, we can't make that same argument. The v'shas ketzira kati lo etchi Shabbos. At the time of harvesting the omer, we haven't pushed off Shabbos for anything yet. V'yafagav de lamocher dachi hakrava Shabbos. Even though tomorrow when we offer it, there's going to be a pushing off of Shabbos. But b'shas ketzira miolo nidchas. We haven't pushed off Shabbos yet. B'shas ketzira v'ilav de lo efshel amer of Shabbos. And so therefore, that's Rebbe's argument. If not for the fact, and that's Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon's argument, if not for the fact that it was impossible before Shabbos, lo have a dachi Shabbos. It wouldn't push off Shabbos. Mishum chavivos mitzvah. This chavivos mitzvah Rebbe Shimon doesn't really apply by the Omer essentially. Now we could ask the same question on Rebbe. Why would you learn from here to there, or from there to here? Shani hasam shari dachsa shchita Shabbos. Because again, that example of chaviva mitzvah b'shaita is different because the shchita already pushed off Shabbos. We could have asked it in that direction. As the Gemara now continues and says what Rashi just said, Eloshani hasam, rather it is different over there. Obviously, by the case of chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, by the burning of the limbs, that's different. Shari dachsa shchita as Shabbos, because already the shchita pushed off Shabbos, and that's why we're not able to learn from there, says Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon, and that's why Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon concludes, again, that one is not allowed to do the Ketziras Omer outside of the proper time. And so now the Gemara asks the question on Rebbe. Well, if that's true, Rebbe hachanami, but according to Rebbe also, dachsa shchita Shabbos. Again, we've already pushed off Shabbos by slaughtering these animals. You shouldn't be able to learn anything from there. And now we're back to the question on Rebbe. Again, the question on Rebbe is, if the Ketziras Omer is Docha Shabbos, how could that be? Why should it be Docha Shabbos if it could have been done before Shabbos? And so the Gemara instead says, Ella, rather we have to say, Kasava Rebbe, that Rebbe holds Ketziras Omer lo Dachya Shabbos, that the harvesting of the Omer is not Docha Shabbos, it doesn't push off Shabbos. Because Rebbe holds that it can be done at any time, it actually does not push off Shabbos. But the Gemara continues, Velo, but is that really true that the Ketziras Omer doesn't push off Shabbos according to Rebbe? But we learned in the Mishnah, this was the Mishnah earlier, the Chachamim say whether on Shabbos or the weekday, Mishalosh Hayabah, the Omer came from 3 saw, and so clearly it is Docha Shabbos. The Gemara says, Deloka Rebbe, that Mishnah is simply not following Rebbe. What about the following? We said, V'chachamim Omer Echad Shabbos V'echad Chol, the same Mishnah, the Chachamim say whether on Shabbos or weekday, B'shloshetz with 3 people, B'shalosh Kupos with 3 baskets, Uv'shalosh Magolos with 3 sickles. Again, seems like it's Docha Shabbos. Again, the Gemara says Deloka Rebbe. That Mishnah is not following Rebbe. And the Gemara continues and says, Uv'Shabbos Yomer Lahem Shabbos. On Shabbos, he says to them, this Shabbos. And again, the implication of that Mishnah earlier is that it's Docha Shabbos. And again, the Gemara says Deloka Rebbe. That Mishnah is not following Rebbe. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Nixer B'Yom Kosher. The end of our Mishnah said, if it's harvested during the day, it's kosher. V'Doches HaShabbos, and it pushes off Shabbos. And again, the Gemara brings this as a question against what we're saying within Rebbe. Man shamat le diyamar nixer b'yom kosher. Who's the Tana that says that if it's harvested during the day, it's still kosher? Harvested outside the proper time is kosher. Rebbe, it's Rebbe, like we've been saying. V'kotani, and yet, what does it say in the Mishnah at the end of our Mishnah? V'doches HaShabbos. It says it does push off the Shabbos. My lav, is it not Ketzira? Aren't we saying at the end of the Mishnah that the harvesting pushes off Shabbos? And again, we're back to saying that Rebbe holds that the harvesting of the Omer pushes off Shabbos. The Gemara says, lo, no, that might not be what the Mishnah means. Lahakrava, it might just mean the bringing, the offering of the Omer is Docha Shabbos, but not the harvesting. But the Gemara continues, Aval Ksira lo, but are we saying the harvesting is not Docha Shabbos? V'hatanya, but we learned in a brayso, Rebbe Yomer, Rebbe says, Vayidaber Moshe Moadei Hashem, the pasuk says Moshe spoke the Moadei Hashem, the holidays of Hashem. Ma Talmud Lomer, what is the pasuk saying over here? Lefishalo lamadnu ela l'tamid v'pesach shenemar b'hen b'moado. We only know about the carbon tamid, the carbon pesach. It says b'moado in its time, and we learn from there b'moado v'afilu b'Shabbos in its time, even on Shabbos. B'moado v'afilu b'tumah in its time, even in a situation of tumah. But shar karbonos hatzibur. How do we know that this applies to other communal karbonos, that they also can push off these halachas? Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, Eila tasu lashem b'moadechem. It says, these you're going to do b'moadechem. And minayin l'rabos omer v'hakarevimo. How do we know to include it? The omer and what's offered with it, and shtei halechem v'hakarevimo, and the shtei halechem on Shavuos and what's offered with them. Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, Vayedaber Moshe Moadei Hashem. It says again, Vayedaber Moshe Moadei Hashem hakasav kava moed. And the pasuk says all of these are considered moed. It's all considered to be their proper time. Now this brisa, what are we talking about over here with regards to the Omer? Lamai, what do we mean to say that the Omer is Docha Shabbos, which is what this brisa seems to be saying? Ilemu lahakrov, if you say we're talking about offering it, which means offering it on the Mizbeach, but shtei halechem b'nei hakrovin inu shtei halechem is mentioned here also, and the shtei halechem is that something offered on the Mizbeach. Of course, the shtei halechem are not offered on the Mizbeach. Elab shita, rather it's obvious. Litchina v'harkada, we're talking about for the grinding and for the sifting. Udechavasa gabe Omer, and then similar to that by the Omer, what would be the equivalent? L'kasira, we'd be talking about the harvesting of the Omer. And again, this brisa seems to be saying, according to Rebbe, that the Omer, the katsiras Omer, the harvesting of the Omer is v'kadachias Shabbos. It is Docha Shabbos. And so the Gemara continues and says, no, Ella Omer lahakrava, rather it could be not like that. The brisa really just means the offering of the Omer is Docha Shabbos. Ushtei halechem la'afiyah, and maybe by the shtei halechem, we're actually talking about the afiyah, the baking of the bread, that is Docha Shabbos, and that would be the equivalent of the Omer by hakrava, because v'kosava Rebbe tanur mekadesh. Rebbe holds that the oven is what's mekadesh, the shtei halechem. And therefore, iafi lo me'esmol, if that would have been baked yesterday, if it would be baked before Shabbos, you'd have a problem. If still a la belina, then it's going to be disqualified by staying overnight, and that's why the shtei halechem, the baking of the shtei halechem specifically, is Docha Shabbos. It has to be done on Shabbos. The Gemara continues, V'sava Rebbe tanur mekadesh. Does Rebbe really hold that the oven is what's mekadesh, the shtei halechem? V'atanya, but we learned in a brisa, kivsei atzeres ein mekadshenes halechem, that the sheep of Atzeres, those sheep that are brought on Shavuos, they're ein mekadshon es halechem ela b'shchita, they only sanctify the bread through slaughtering. Keitzad haso, shachtan l'shmon, v'zarak daman l'shmon, if they're slaughtered for their sake, and their blood is thrown for their sake, kidesh halechem, then the bread is sanctified. Shachtan shalo l'shmon, v'zarak daman shalo l'shmon, if they're slaughtered not for their sake, and the blood is thrown not for their sake, lo kidesh halechem, then the bread is not sanctified. Shachtan l'shmon, v'zarak daman shalo l'shmon, if they're slaughtered for their sake, the blood is thrown not for their sake, so halechem kadosh v'yeino kadosh, the bread is sanctified, but not really fully sanctified. Divrei Rebbe, these are the words of Rebbe. Rebbe Lazar, Rebbe Shimon, Omer liolam eino kadosh. Rebbe Lazar, Rebbe Shimon says it's not sanctified ad sheyishchot l'shmon v'yizrok daman l'shmon, until it's slaughtered l'shmon and the blood is thrown l'shmon. It has to be all done for their sake. And the simple understanding of this brisa is the brisa is saying that it is the slaughtering of the sheep that actually is mekadesh the shtei halechem, and not the baking in the oven. And the Gemara says to that, Amar of Nachman bar Yitzchak, of Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Hukvu v'lo hukvu kamer. We're not talking here about the sanctification of the loaves. We're talking about hukvu, which essentially is the attaching, the establishing of the loaves as connected to the sheep. And this was discussed earlier, various explanations of this brisa, but the explanation again over here in this Gemara is hukvu v'lo hukvu. And the point therefore is the brisa is not saying that the slaughtering of the sheep is mekadesh l'lechem. Really, according to Rebbe, it is the oven which is mekadesh the lechem. And Rashi explains, again, the Brisa asked, Ma Talmud Lomer, what is the pasuk saying when it says, Vayedaber Moshe Moadei Hashem, V'alo kol ha-moados amurin l'malu, Moshe Amrin, all of the moados were said above, and Moshe said them. And then the Brisa said, B'moadeichem, it says in the pasuk, B'moadeichem, V'afilu b'Shabbos, which means, as we said, even on Shabbos, they're docha Shabbos, over Parshas Pinchas, Ksiv Gavi Musaf, and this is written in Parshas Pinchas by the Karban Musaf. Now, Minayin l'Rabos Omer, from where do we know to include also the Omer, that is Docha Shabbos, so lo ksib bahi parsha, so that's not written in that particular parsha. V'hakoriv imo, and that which comes together with it, that's keves haboim Omer, there's a sheep that comes with the Omer. V'hakoriv imo, and that which comes with the shtei halechem is the kivsei Atzeres, the sheep of Atzeres. And Rashi continues, the Brisa said, Talmud Lomer Vayedaber Moshe, the pasuk says Vayedaber Moshe, uvahi parsha so de Emor l'kohanim, that's in the parsha of Emor, and ksiv, it's written over there, Omer u shtei halechem, it says the Omer and the shtei halechem, and therefore we see the Omer and the shtei halechem, they are docha Shabbos. And so at first the Gemara said, are we talking about hakrava? Are we talking about the offering? That can't be, because shtei halechem and hakrava ninu, are the shtei halechem, are they offered on the mizbeach? Of course not. So what are we talking about is docha Shabbos by the shtei halechem? Elapshita letzchina v'arkadim must be the grinding and the sifting. And the Gemara said that the equivalent to that would be with regards to the Omer. It would be the harvesting. V'afagav de efshel lo lasos me'esmol. And the point over here is, even though the tchina and the harakata could have been done yesterday, still it is docha Shabbos. And then we would say, according to Rebbe, that when it comes to the harvesting of the Omer as well, even if it could be done the day before, as Rebbe holds, still it is docha Shabbos. And again, that would bring us back to the point that Rebbe holds it is docha Shabbos, even though it is able to be done not on Shabbos. And the Gemara continued and said, Lo, no, that's not what the Brisa means at all. Omer lahakrava, we're talking specifically about the offering of the Omer that's docha Shabbos, the efshel me'esmol, because the offering could not be done yesterday. Ubeis halechem u'shtei halechem la'afiyah, and the shtei halechem, we're only talking about the baking, to kasavar tana mekadesh. As the Gemara said, Rebbe holds that the oven is mekadesh, and so therefore the baking can't be done early, then it's going to be a disqualification of lina, because it's already sanctified, and that's why that has to be done on Shabbos. And so again, essentially, the point of the Gemara was to say, according to Rebbe, who says that the harvesting doesn't specifically have to be at night, it can be done at any time, it's not preferred that way, but it's kosher at any time. Again, it is not. The harvesting of the Omer is not docha Shabbos, and the Gemara remains with that idea. This brisa does not go against that. This brisa is talking about the baking of the shtei halechem and the offering of the Omer. And the Gemara then asked, Ela b'shchita, but 1 second, doesn't Rebbe really say that it is the shchita which is mekadesh? Aval ba'afiyah lo kachina, but not the baking. Kadosh ve'no kadosh, what it means when Rebbe says it's sanctified but not sanctified, that was mefarish b'Perakat Cheles. That was explained earlier in Perakat Cheles. Again, this was discussed. And the Gemara ultimately explained this brisa as hukvu, talking about hukvu, which means shachtan lishman v'zarak daman lishman. If the shchita is done and the zrika is done for their sake, hukvu hachalos la'osan kavasim. Essentially, the chalos become connected, intertwined, so to speak, with the sheep. Ve'in yachol l'shanos halechem l'zevach acher. You can't move that bread over to another carbon, to another animal. Shachtan lishman v'zarak daman shalo lishman lo hukvu. And then if it's the zrika is done shalo lishman, even if the shchita is lishman, it's not going to be established in that manner. Aval kadosh betana. But again, in terms of sanctification, according to Rebbe, Rebbe, that's going to be in the oven. Hadron Aloch Rabbi Yishmael, we will return to you, Perek Rabbi Yishmael. And this is the end of the 6th parak of Meseches Menachos. If you're enjoying these videos and this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And take a look at the description box below to see how you can support this channel. And we will now begin the 7th parak of Meseches Menachos. And the parak begins with the Mishnah, V'elu Menachos Nikmatzos, the following Karban Minchas, the Kmitza, the fistful, is taken. V'shirei and Kohanim, and then whatever remains, that goes to the Kohanim to be eaten by the Kohanim. And they are as follows, Minchas HaSoles, V'hamachvas, V'hamarcheshes, the fine flour mincha, the pan mincha, the deep pan mincha, v'hachalos and the chalos, v'harakikin, and the wafers. That's talking again about a minchas mafe. It could be of chalos or rakikin. Again, we'll see the opinion of Rabbi Shimon in a moment that it could be half chalos and half rakikin as well. And minchas ovdei kochavim, the mincha of the ovdei kochavim, of idolaters, uminchas nashim, and of women, uminchas omer, and the minchas omer, uminchas chote, and the mincha of the sinner, uminchas kenos, and the minchas kenos, which is the mincha of the sota. And the Mishnah continues, Rabbi Shimon omer, Rabbi Shimon says, minchas chote shel kohanim, if it's the minchas chote of kohanim, nikmetzes, the kometz is taken, the kometz karav la'atzmo, and then the kometz is offered on its own, v'shirayim krevim li'atzman, and then the remainder is offered on their own. And Rashi explains, ve'elu menachos minchas hasolas haisa nikmetzes isa, the minchas hasolas, the kometz is taken as dough, uminchas chote, then also in the list was the minchas chote shel Yisrael, that's the minchas chote of a Yisrael, the sinner's mincha if he's a Yisrael, nikmetzes, then the kometz is taken. Aval minchas chote shel kohanim lo haisa nikmetzes klal, but the minchas chote of kohanim, again before we get to Rabbi Shimon, is not, there's no kometz at all, ela kula haisa kolal, rather it's burned in its entirety. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Papa says, kol heicha de tanan eser tanan, anytime we have a Mishnah, the Mishnah always has 10. Again, there were 2 explanations of what exactly this means, but we'll go with the explanation that when we have Elu Menachos and list a bunch of Karban Minchas, there are 10 in the list. And my Kamash Malon la'afukim Rabbi Shimon, what is this coming to teach us? This comes to exclude Rabbi Shimon's opinion. He has 11 in the list. The Amar Mechza Chalos Umechza Rakikin, he says that in a situation of a baked mincha, there's another possibility. It could be, there's of course the possibility that it can be all chalos or all rakikin, but there's another possibility it can be half chalos and half rakikin. Yavi, he can bring that as well. Kamash Malon Delo, and so our Mishnah is teaching that is not the case. Again, there's another way of learning Rav Papa that we're talking about bringing 10 loaves in all of these cases. And again, it goes against Rabbi Shimon. He says there's a possibility of mechza chalos and mechza rakikin, 5 of each. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Vishireyan lekohanim, the remainder of the mincha is eaten by the kohanim. The Gemara says, Menolan, from where do we know this? And the Gemara says, Dechsiva ksiva, that's where it's written. It's written. Udelo ksiva, and if it wasn't written, ksiva vizos toras hamincha hakre vosa b'nei Aaron, vanoseres mimeno yochlu Aaron uvanav. In other words, the Gemara essentially is asking, isn't it written in the pasuk? What do you mean Menolan? What do you mean from where do we know it? Rashi explains, Dechsiva bitmiya, this is being asked as a question. Dechsibu nikmetzes v'shirel kohanim kagon b'chamish menachos. By 5 of the menachos, it's written over there. And the lo ksibu, let's say it's not written in the Torah. Kagon minchas ovdei kochavim or minchas chote. It doesn't mention it by the minchas ovdei kochavim or minchas chote. But ksib, but it's written in v'zos Torahs demashma Torah achas l'chol menachos. There's one law for all menachos. Shekol mincha hanikmetzes. Anytime you have a mincha where the kometz is taken, nachol and hashirayim lekohanim. The remainder is eaten by the kohanim. And the Gemara continues and says, ba chitin lo kami boil. And actually, when we have a mincha that comes as wheat, you're right, that wasn't a question to us. We understand that the remainder is eaten by the kohanim. Ki kami boil. And when was it a question to us? Ba sa'orin, when it comes as barley. And Rashi explains, Ba chitin lo kami boilon dahanoseres mi menuksiv. It says whatever remained. B'chamish menachos shnemar ben solas shein chitin, by the 5 menachos that it says solas, that they are wheat. Again, if it comes from wheat, that's not a question. But ba sa'orin, but if it comes from barley, could go in, for example, minchas omer, the omer is from barley, uminchas kenos, and the sota's carbon, the sota's mincha is from barley. That's where it was a question. But the Gemara continues and says, 1 second, ba sa'orin nami, when it comes to coming from barley as well, midinik metzes shirel kohanim. Isn't it from the fact that the kamitza is taken, the remainder goes to the kohanim? Rashi explains, Midan nikmetzes techsiba azkarasa. It says azkarasa. The azkara of the carbon is the kometz, which is burned on the mizbeach. That creates the remembrance, so to speak, of the carbon. And so therefore, again, it should seem to be obvious over there as well that shira is la kohanim. And the Gemara continues and says, Aliba de rabbanon lo kami boilan. It's not a question according to the rabbanon. Rashi here explains, Aliba de Rabbanan Damrina b'Masnisin ve'elu Menachos Nikmotzos. They say that the following minchas the kometz is taken. Tevade, that's certainly true. Mida Nikmotzos shiren lakohanim. If the kometz is taken from that fact, we know that the remainder goes to the kohanim again. It's not a question according to the Rabbanan. Kikami boilan Aliba de Rabbi Shimon. It's a question according to Rabbi Shimon. Diyamar ika mincha de mikmitza velo mesachla. He says that there's a mincha where the kometz is taken and it is not eaten. Rashi explains, Kikami boile Aliba de Rabbi Shimon damar ika mincha ve'ika lemeimer hanami minchas omer minchas kenos. We can say by the minchas omer and the minchas kenos as well. Afagav de nikmotzos, even though the kometz is taken, but ika lemeimer de shireyan ein nacholin. But isn't it possible to say that the remainder is not eaten? Rabbi Shimon has that possibility. Again, as we learned in our Mishnah, the Tanan, as we learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon omer minchas chote shel kohanim nikmetzes hakometz kara biatzma v'ashirayim kreivim biatzman. Rabbi Shimon says by the minchas chote of kohanim, the kometz is taken and offered on its own, and the shirayim are offered on their own. And since he has that possibility, so therefore we're asking within Rabbi Shimon, isn't it possible by the minchas omer and the minchas kenos? Again, these are the cases of seorin. Isn't it possible the same thing? Maybe the kometz is taken, but the remainder is not eaten by the kohanim. And the Gemara continues and says, Menolan, now from where do we know this? Amar Chizkiah says, the Amar Kra, because the Pasuk says, V'chol mincha belula b'Hashem, and any mincha which is mixed with oil, v'chareva, or if it's dry, l'chol b'nei Aaron tiyah, that goes to all the b'nei Aaron, to all the children of Aaron. Now, meino inyan lebelula shel chitin. Now, if we can't apply this Pasuk by the mincha of chitin, of wheat, which is mixed with oil, teneyu inyan lebelula shel saor, and then we should apply it instead to the barley mincha, which is mixed with oil. V'meino inyan lechareva, and also if we can't apply it to the dry mincha of wheat, and we should apply it to the dry one of barley. And Rashi explains, meaning the pasuk already says by chitin, it says whatever is remaining is going to be eaten by Aaron and his sons, and this is also saying the same thing essentially. And so therefore we should apply it to Sa'orin. Now belula shel Sa'orin, which one of the carbon minchas of barley is mixed with oil? That's mincha Sa'omer, that's the Omer. And lechareva shel chitin, what's an example of a dry chitin mincha? Kagon minchas mafa, that's what's called the baked mincha. And lechareva shel Sa'orim, what's an example of a dry barley mincha? That's minchas kenos, that's the mincha of the sota. But the Gemara continues and asks, "V'hai lachi udas, is this pasuk really needed to teach what we said above? Hamiboy le l'chidatanya, isn't it needed for what is taught in the following brisa? Minayin shein cholken menachos keneged zvachim. From where do we know that we don't apportion menachos corresponding to zvachim? Rashi explains, keneged zvachim means shelo yomer hakohen lechavero. One kohen shouldn't say to another kohen, tola tazvachim, you take the slaughtered karbanos, v'ani menachos, and I'll take the menachos. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph.